I'm Monica Pearson, your moderator for this conversation on how to ensure positive and peaceful elections in Georgia. This is an informational and not a confrontational discussion with a distinguished panel of Georgia leaders. The Honorable Brad Raffensperger, Georgia Secretary of State, Representative Karen Bennett, Chair of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, Dr. George T. French Jr., President of Clark Atlanta University, and also the Chief Executive Officers of the King Center, Dr. Bernice A. King, and of the Carter Center, Ms. Paige Alexander. I'm going to thank them all for being here. Now, the state of Georgia is expecting the greatest voter turnout in its history, possibly totaling 6 million voters. Georgia is seen as a potential swing state, and with 2 Senate races up for grabs, Georgia is in the national spotlight. Our democracy relies on the free exercise of voting, but some citizens believe these rights are being suppressed or strained. During our recent primary elections, Georgians waited patiently to vote in some of the longest lines in the country, and there was some violence in the streets of Atlanta. The country is polarized, and people are questioning the reliability of the electoral process. They ask, what is being done to ensure that voting and the counting of the votes is free, fair, and peaceful? And what can be done to ensure patience with the post-election process? And how do we manage the disappointment of those who will not win? You know, the losers. Because of the importance of these questions, the King Center and the Carter Center have joined together to host this event, bringing with them their expertise and the legacies of their 2 distinguished founders. Now, we're doing this in 2 segments. The first segment will include Secretary Raffensperger, Representative Bennett, and Ms. Alexander. Thank you for joining us. Secretary Raffensperger, you've predicted tomorrow will be a day for long lines and even longer lines on Election Day Tuesday. Now, you've opened more polls for early voting. What other things have you put into place to keep those lines moving faster?
Well, during early voting, particularly in Fulton County, we opened up the Hawks Arena, and I voted there in 22 minutes, and it's just been a tremendous benefit. People have just had a great time going there. And so we've looked at innovations like that. First of all, making sure that our poll workers are trained, poll worker recruitment. We've recruited over 40,000 poll workers, new poll workers, because many of the previous ones had stepped out due to COVID. So we had to recruit a whole new batch. And then making sure coming up on Tuesday that we had a tech expert at every one of the precincts, so that when we had a technical glitch or something happened, we could resolve that quickly to keep those lines moving. But we're really pleased right now. Right now, we're at 2.5 voters that have already voted early. Another 1.2 nearly have voted absentee that we've accepted. And so we're about 3.6 million right now. In 2016, the total vote was 4.1. So before we even hit Tuesday, we could very well hit that number in the early vote and also the absentees. Very pleased in where we are right now.
Well, one of the big concerns for everyone has been those absentee ballots. It's too late to mail them now. So what should people do if they still have their absentee ballot?
Well, since Tuesday, I've told anyone if my absentee ballot was still sitting on my kitchen table, I would fill it out, go ahead and put it in the envelope, sign your name, and then I would drop it off at an absentee ballot drop box that your counties have. That's the best thing that you can do right now. And it's really the only thing you can do. You know, tomorrow's Friday. So an absentee ballot drop box. And if you're in one of the counties that don't have those, some of the rural counties don't, you can walk right into your election official's office and just give them there and they'll accept it. So either way, that is the most secure. And it's really now the only way because of the time schedule where we are. And to that point, Monica, right now there's still 400,000 absentee ballots that are sitting on people's kitchen's table. We got to get those off their tables and into the ballot box.
Well, then the question becomes, what if I decide I don't want to do the ballot box? I'm going to vote on Tuesday. I've gotten my absentee ballot. What's going to happen to me when I show up at the polls?
You can still vote. What we would encourage you, though, is bring that ballot with you, because it just makes it a lot more efficient for the poll worker to take you off the absentee ballot list, so then you can vote in person. But it's not a problem. And we've already had about 200,000 voters that have showed up that had an absentee ballot, but then decided to vote in person during the early cycle. And I'm sure we'll have people tomorrow that show up, and I'm sure we'll have people show up on Tuesday. But that just helps when you bring the ballot with you.
And even if you never received your absentee ballot, even though you applied for it, what can you do?
Show up to vote because you'll be shown whether your ballot has been accepted. And if it's not been accepted, the absentee ballot, then we just take you off the absentee ballot list and then you vote. So it's not a problem. So please show up if you don't get your absentee ballot.
There's been a lot of concern lately about what's going to happen to all of the ballots. There are worries that our system could be easily hacked. What are you doing to protect the integrity of the vote and the computer system?
Well, we have a very strong cyber defenses, and we've been working on that. We understand there's a lot of threat vectors out there right now, but also the advantage of having a verifiable paper ballot is that once you vote in person and you have that paper ballot and it's been scanned, then when we come back, if we had to, if something ever did happen, we have a paper ballot to come back and physically recount. We're also going to do our first statewide audit of the race, and that'll be something that we're really pleased. It'll be a risk limiting audit, because at the end of the day, we can then verify what the election outcome was. If you report in the evening news, it was a 51-49, we can audit it to verify it was a 51-49. And that gives voters confidence. And we understand there's a lot of people that want to undermine the confidence of our election process. And the more we can do it, establish that we have good procedures in place and we can verify the results, then I think that helps restore confidence in the system.
In reality, how soon are we going to know who won what in Georgia? When will you start counting the ballots? And when will we have numbers?
Well, here's the good news. The state election board gave the authorization to the counties that on the absentee ballots, you can begin separating and processing it and actually scanning those ballots, scanning but not tabulating. So your counties have been already scanning these ballots. Down in Muskogee County, they believe that they'll be caught up. And so Tuesday evening of election night, they'll have all their absentee ballots already tabulated, because after 7 o'clock, you can press a button. They're immediately then tabulated. And so we will have most of the results on Tuesday evening. And so the races that aren't real close, if you have a state house race that's within 30 votes, obviously that's one of those things that we'll have to wait a little bit longer. But the bigger the difference in the plurality or in the majority of that vote, the sooner we can declare who the winners were on the race. But I think that we'll have most of the results in by Tuesday evening. At the latest will be Wednesday around noontime. And
that's amazing.
That's going to be compared to some of the other states, because many of the other states, Monica, are not going to begin that scanning process, that tabulation process, until after the polls close on Tuesday night. And it really puts them way behind where we are in Georgia.
Well, there's been talk of armed people observing at the polls. Who can legally observe? And then how will you, quote unquote, handle these observers who are armed?
Well, we have a process for poll watchers. And so your county election officials know who those folks are. Generally, it'll be someone from the Democrat Party, Republican Party, Libertarian Party, and then it could be actually even, an outside observing party. But those are all pre-approved, and they are given a set of rules. So everyone knows what the rules are. We also are going to be monitoring the situation for any threats, physical violence, or any intimidation. And that's not going to be tolerated. And we'll make sure it's handled very quickly.
Well, Representative Bennett, as chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, what are your constituents telling you about problems they faced in voting?
Initially, of course, the first day of early voting, there were some long lines throughout, and there were a couple of my precincts that did not have the necessary equipment to start and open the poll on time. However, since then, what I'm hearing is it's been flexible, whether the lines are long and short. I guess it depends on when you go to vote. But the most important concerns right now are being expressed by my seniors. Now that there are special provisions for the seniors, even the seniors are having to stand in line. And so, Secretary Raffensperger, I don't know what you can do at this date, but if the seniors can be taken care of so that when they do go to vote, that they still do not have to endure the long lines that are anticipated, with tomorrow being the last day of early voting and Tuesday's vote.
Well, I think that's a good question because my husband is a precinct manager, and he walks through the line and gets the senior citizens and brings them to the front. Secretary Raffensperger, what else can be done for seniors?
Well, state law is anyone over the age 75 or older can move to the front of the line. So you're not cutting the line. You have that right. It's in state law to move forward. And so they really should be doing that, just moving forward. And I would believe that every county would already have those procedures in place. So that's something that's established law. So everyone needs to be moved up. Now, if you have so many folks that are over the age of 75, well, then you could have a line of people that are 75 plus. There's nothing we can do about that. That just means we have great turnout, because we are having great turnout, all age groups throughout the entire state, both political parties. It's just a record turnout election.
How about people with disabilities?
Likewise, they move to the front of the line also. So it's disabilities and 75 or older.
Now, Representative Bennett, what resources are being provided to support vulnerable communities if they do face challenges at the polling sites? We just learned now for the disabled and for those over 75, did you say, sir?
75 and older.
Then they can move to the front of the line. What other challenges are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, there is a concern of voter intimidation. And so, Secretary Raffensperger, whatever information that can be given out over the airways, you've done a great job in some advertisements through media, whatever information that can be done to alleviate some of those concerns. As to the question has already been asked, who can show up at the poll and be a poll watcher? We know that other than the official poll watchers, you must maintain 150 feet from the polling location. But what happens when some of these groups show up? And I think that's a conversation that's being had because the poll workers and the poll watchers are inside of the precinct. So who's monitoring what's going on outside of the precinct?
Well, generally what you're seeing is that most of the precincts will have actually someone do line management, because the people now, the voters are all spaced 6 feet apart. And so you're just ending up, it doesn't take long to have, quote, a line form just because you're spaced 6 feet apart. So there's typically, it's depending on the county and how large the precinct is, it really is the resources to bear. I know down at Hawks Arena, there was so many human resources out there. A lot of those were Hawks employees that were out there. And so it wasn't an issue, obviously, but we want to make sure that everyone feels safe. The elections need to be run safe, sensibly, and responsibly. And we will not tolerate any type of intimidation from any party, from any place.
Well, one way the lines can be shortened also is, I think, don't you have a website now where people can go check in certain counties how long the wait is at their particular precinct?
I know that Fulton County and Cobb County have that up. I've gone to their websites. Many other counties have incorporated that app so you can look at how long it takes. On tomorrow, you can vote anywhere in your county. Now, come Tuesday, you have to vote in your precinct. But at least it is a good tool. You can see what's the line now at 7 a.m., what is it at 10 a.m., is there a dip? So you can say, well, when is it a 20-minute wait, when is it a 10-minute wait? And it's just a county by county or precinct by precinct wait time. Some precincts just tend to really be very efficient, and also they aren't as large as some of them that have a lot of voters. But our whole goal is to make sure people move through those lines on Tuesday. And a shout out to Fulton County. They've been working hard. The county commissioner's been working hard alongside of the county election officials to make sure that people move on Tuesday through the lines so we don't have those waits we had back in June.
Ms. Alexander, this is the first time I can remember the Carter Center being involved in U.S. elections. Why did the center feel there was a need?
Yeah, it is. We're concerned that the extreme political polarization and the disinformation about the election process and a greater reliance on mail-in voting, because of the pandemic, those things are all undermining voters' trust in the U.S. process. So we decided to get involved this year. We have looked at elections in 111 different elections in 39 countries, and most of those are in emerging or distressed democracies that have faced similar challenges. So it just seemed natural. However, we really couldn't get involved in observing every election because, as Secretary Raffensperger said, there are 159 counties in Georgia. That's 159 separate elections, essentially. So the Carter Center's election project is aimed at strengthening public trust in the electoral process and providing a greater public information about it and encouraging election officials to be transparent. So we're very excited to be involved in these projects. We've got partners that we've worked with to produce a report on the laws for the policy and observers across all 50 states. We've been working with Secretary Raffensperger and his bipartisan task force on safe, secure, and accessible elections. We also have been talking about transparency and absentee ballot processing. As we were saying, Georgia is actually in a lead on this. On all of the maps, we're considered the hare as opposed to the tortoise to be able to get those absentee ballots counted fast. So we'll know a little bit ahead of some of these other states what the results are going to be that night. And we're also looking at violence prevention in partnership with Cure for Violence Global and Princeton University's Bridging Divides, because I think a lot of this is about disinformation that's coming out. It really has the risk of going viral and undermining the goals and people's ability to know fact from fiction. So these are the areas that the Carter Center is working in, and we're happy to have partners on the ground doing this.
Well, what is important for people to know about their rights when they go to the polls, and maybe even the fear of long lines and intimidation at the polls?
Yeah, I think, people's right. The most important thing when people go to the poll is to have a voting plan and to know your rights. There are a lot of online resources available. You can go to cartercenter.org/vote to find some of these. One is, as we've been talking about, tomorrow is the last day for early voting, and you need to have your mail-in ballots received by 7 p.m. on election night, or else they won't be counted. So they're just some basic facts. Also checking to see if you're registered and where your polling place is. And you can do that through the Secretary of State's website at sos.ga.gov. So I think, making sure you bring your photo ID with you, making sure if something's wrong with that you still do a provisional ballot, and to be sure to ask the poll worker what else is needed before you leave the precinct, and to check your paper ballot after it prints out. Make sure that everything you voted is the actual vote that you want, because once that paper ballot goes in, it's in.
Well, to the three of you, what have you learned in this process that you can now say, for our next election, this will be in place? Best practices.
Well,
silent here.
Secretary of State.
Well, first of all, we stood up that absentee ballot portal, and we had kudos from all the county election directors. It's just so seamless. It really eliminates the counties having to transpose the written documents that come in. It's error-free. It takes less than 30 seconds to request your absentee ballot. So that's number one. We want to expand that. That's been tremendous. Then the absentee ballot drop boxes, I think, has been also another great innovation that other states have been using. And I think that's something that we'd like to keep going forward. So those are two key elements right there. I think also we also have a tool called, it's a Esri. It's a GPS, and it really gives us, it's a line management tool. It also is a tech management. If anything goes down on the equipment, we'll know where a tech worker is and also how long it takes to resolve that. So we're going to be using that to give us constant feedback during 7 to 7 on Tuesday. So that's another thing. And then ballot tracks. I think that's tremendous for tracking your absentee ballot, because you can sign up for that before you even request your ballot. And then once your ballot is going through your application is going through the whole system, your ballot, you mail it back, you'll know exactly what the status is. And I think that the more information a voter has, it puts them in the driver's seat. And they should be in the driver's seat because they are the voter. At the end of the day, we all work for the voters. And so that's where we need to be, is have it be voter-centric.
Representative Bennett?
I like what Secretary says about information. The more information that the voters are armed with, the better and smoother I believe the process will go. I like the idea of plan your vote. I know that's been a recent idea, but moving forward, that should become a part of the voting process. And also know before you go, have the voter protection hotline information with you at the time that you go. That will be one of the most important pieces of information to have with you. And then remember to get in line, stay in line, and then people say, hold the line. So again, we were told that there will be technical assistance at each polling location. Is that correct, Secretary?
Yep, that's what we're working towards. We still have a few precincts, and we're working to get those covered up for Tuesday.
So as much information as we can provide with our voters, through our nonprofits, through our community organizations, and certainly from our Secretary of State office through the TV commercials that you have been posting, that voter protection hotline for everyone to have when they go to the polls, I think will be very important. So plan your vote and know before you go.
And it's important for people to remember that if you're in line at 7 o'clock, you can still vote.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things, to Monica, to your question, one of the things we've learned in such a challenging time, that there are a lot of opportunities that have come out that we have been able to sort of leapfrog over systems that we had sort of found ourselves sticking our head in the sand saying, I'm not quite sure this can change. Well, everything is changing now. And I think the counties and the Secretary of State's office have all done a really nice job in trying to modernize, probably a little faster than maybe some of them wanted to, but we're in a really good place. And Ballot Tracks has been a great addition, and Fulton County has an app, and there's a lot going on that I don't think we would have imagined being able to do 4 years ago, or even as recently as the primary.
It's interesting that if you watch the national news, Georgia is still shown as, quote, backwards, and that our system isn't as up to par. They're still showing primary pictures with the long lines and still saying that the vote is being suppressed. How do we get the message out there that, hey, guys, we're doing better than everybody else?
Well, I'm going to jump in here because Secretary Raffensperger mentioned the risk limiting audit. And I think that, Georgia is only one of 12 states that are actually looking to validate the votes this way. And again, the Carter Center is going to be a part of that. And, having us in front of the window so we can actually see how this is being done. It's a really important part of building trust with the voters. And I think it's an important story to tell. It might not be the most interesting one if the line isn't around the corner or you don't have a hanging chad, but it is going to be one that I think really speaks highly to how far Georgia has come. And I'm thrilled that we are part of that RLA, and appreciate that the state's going to be doing that.
Well, to all three of you, do you have any final thoughts before I move on to the next section and lose Representative Bennett and Secretary Raffensperger?
I'd just like to once again thank the Carter Center, thank the King Center, and thank you, Monica, for your moderation of this matter. And again, one of the most important things at this late juncture, for tomorrow being the last day to early vote, just be prepared. There are resources available. There is a website of Hold the Line, and they have a voter's guide, as well as www.11.3 now. Those are additional resources that you can go to get more information. So thank you.
Secretary Raffensperger, you have the last word because Paige is hanging over to the next segment.
We have one more day for early voting. Make the most of it. And if you don't make it out then by tomorrow, then be out there Tuesday. And what I would encourage everyone is to be patient and extend grace to the poll workers. Many of them, this is the first time they've done that. And when you begin the whole process of voting, it's really when the community should come together. Doesn't mean we all vote for the same person. I understand where we are, but we can still come together and respect each other and understand the tough job that the poll workers do. Be really grateful that if they weren't there, what would we do? And so extend grace to them. Enjoy the day.
Quick question to all three of you. Have you voted, and how did you vote?
I went in, I voted early, and it took me about 25 minutes in Fulton County.
Representative Bennett?
I masked up. I went to my early voting location. I took my hand sanitizer. The line was 15 minutes. And I was out there with my peach on. And so, yes, I wanted to make sure that I physically went to vote, but safely.
Secretary Raffensperger?
I voted at the Hawks Arena, and it was 20 to 22 minutes.
Can't beat that. Thank you all for participating very much. And now we're going to move to the second segment. Well, part two is even more interesting. In this portion of our discussion, we are actually going to talk about some things that we want you to be aware of, but we don't want to scare you. But with all the conversation in the streets, on social media, and on mainstream media outlets, there's an awful lot of talk about the possibility of voter fraud, the possibility of the losing side taking to the streets in the wrong way. How do we keep that from happening? Joining us now, Dr. Bernice King of the King Center, Dr. George T. French, president of Clark Atlanta University, and returning Ms. Paige Alexander of the Carter Center. Dr. King, in this polarized environment, how do we ease the anxiety and the tensions following this election?
Well, the first thing that we have to reassure people of is that we still are a nation of laws. That regardless of the outcome and the reaction to the outcome, we have legislative processes, we have judicial processes that will more than likely be utilized. Our role and responsibility as a citizenry is one, not to add fuel to the fire, but to use our courageous voices through the rights that we have been given, particularly the right to protest in nonviolent means. It's important that we connect with organizations who understand that type of protest. And because we know people are going to protest, we might as well prepare for it. All the way around, the stakes are very high. People are very vested in this election and the outcome of this election. And tempers are probably going to flare after it's over. But again, we don't want to be that log on the fire. We want to be those who respond, as my father said in his I Have a Dream speech, on the high plane of dignity and discipline. Again, utilizing what he said in his last words, the mountaintop, where he said, the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. So the pressure that has to be applied by the citizenry, by those of us in the we the people, as we exercise that right to protest for right, make sure we target it towards those legislators who may have to make decisions, and whatever voice we have. The Supreme Court process is a little bit different, but you don't be silent. Silence is not an option, but violence is never the way.
Trusting the system is hard for many people, particularly for older people who remember all the problems you had voting. So how do you control that anger? What can people do on a personal level?
Well, I think people need to prepare themselves now. The things you can do on a daily basis. The movement that my father led, people signed pledge cards to join it. I think we need to make personal pledges to the process of how we're going to manage those emotions. We have to have a way to channel them. And that's why I say it's important that those who feel the need to express themselves because of the results, that they find organizations and entities that will be doing protests, but ensure that those are organizations that are committed to the nonviolent way of protesting. That is important to say in this environment. The other thing is we need to rely upon each other. We're all in this together. We're still citizens of the United States of America, and more importantly, we are members of humanity, and we can never forget that we are part of the human race, and that there is a tomorrow, regardless of who wins the presidential election, regardless of who will control the House or the Senate. What I have realized all of my life, and what many people I think are now realizing more than ever before, we can no longer be indifferent and allow ourselves to give over power just to voting. We have to be consistently engaged. Voting is one ingredient, but we have to be consistently engaged and aligned with organizations that are working on policy reforms, that are working on policy issues. And we got to go to work, and we still combine that with nonviolent demonstrations were appropriate. And then we combine that with people who understand working behind the scenes to negotiate some things. And so that's what I would say to people personally. Prepare now, because we know that either your choice or somebody else is going to win. That's just the reality. We got two people in terms of the presidency, because that's really where the stakes are the highest, as we know. And let's just be real. Somebody's going to lose. We have to accept that. Most of us, all of us are grown. We are adults. And we have to conduct ourselves in that way and still use the fiery power, the courageousness, the revolutionary way without destroying each other.
Well, that leads me to Dr. French, because over there at Clark Atlanta University, you have young people, and some of them don't trust the system. Now, many more of them have registered to vote this year, and many of them have already voted. But some of them are still questioning the reason they should vote. And I found in talking to them, the story of how people died for their right to vote does not resonate with them, and they are angry because they don't see the benefits of voting. What are you doing at Clark Atlanta University to get young people to become involved in the system, not only by voting, but doing what Dr. King just talked about, being involved?
Well, let me begin here by saying, first of all, it's a benefit to me to have my colleague and strategist, Bernice King. It's such an honor to be with her. And every time she says, "This is what my daddy said," that sits me down every time, like, this was your daddy. And Bernice has picked up the mantle, and she is as real gets. And when the sister tells you about how this generation feels, she has a clear understanding. Secondly, a part of, before I go directly there, a part of who we can be is a part of who we see. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and do you know the baddest sister that I saw? All these other folks on television, but boy, when Monica Kaufman came on, she shut down in Louisville, Kentucky. And we had folks saying, "I want to be Monica. I want to be Monica." I mean, for us to be able to see you, Monica, made all the difference in the world. And where we are right now with this election, even with the election of Barack Hussein Obama, is that we were able to see ourselves in a position that we couldn't before. So now, this generation, yes, they may have some generational disillusionment, apathy, based on what they've seen in 2016. But the thing is, we at the Academy, we go deeper. We say, well, what actually happened? How did it occur that a party that lost by 3 million votes still won the presidency? Because we have to look at predictive analytics. We have to disaggregate those data of those 3 million, go to the swing states, go to the Electoral College, and teach our students what the Electoral College is all about. So it's about get out the vote. Let's all go vote. But we have to be strategic in our directions and make sure that we influence those pressure points that would influence the Electoral College. So from my position, from my posture as a university, one of the finest universities in the country, Clark Atlanta University, I say to my students, okay, vote, let's also engage in predictive analysis, also look at the swing state and the Electoral College and understand that process. But the bottom line is you have to be engaged every day, all day, 100%.
What are your students saying to you about this election? Now, everybody talks about the presidency, but the down ballot things sometimes are even more important.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying to my students. Those that I am persuading to go, Monica, to law school, now more than ever, while we talk about the election of the presidency, we also have to look at the Supreme Court. And what happens at that court with the nomination and clear election recently, and of course, CAU is political, so we don't have a dog in the race. But I'm saying to my students, look at both sides. And what will happen in the Supreme Court with immigration, voting rights, everything that we fought for the next decade. So that means that we need to have sharp, serious individuals going to law school, going to the DA's office, to the prosecutor's office, and even being trained for appellate decisions, which and being a student of jurisprudence, I know that when you're on one level, you stand before a court and you make arguments. But when you get to the appellate level, it's all paper. So you have to be able to write. You have to have these skills to make sure that it stops at the appellate level and that there are no writs of certiorari granted to go to the United States Supreme Court. So what I'm saying is that we have to be skilled to make sure for this generation that if we have issues of importance, that they really don't make it to the court right now because the court is packed. So we have to have skilled attorneys that will make sure to do their jobs on the local and appellate level so that you don't even get to the Supreme Court. So I'm telling my students, be the best of the best, be resilient, be responsible, be sharp in your skills, and represent us well. That's what I'm saying.
Well, what are you telling them about if who they support loses and taking to the streets?
That it is a methodic process. It is that if we were to go to Monica, if we were to go to Martin Luther King Jr., the difference that he made in going to the streets was being methodic, intentional, and deliberate, and doing his research and listening to his mentor, Benjamin Elijah Mays, saying, listen, King, before you go out there, study the principles of Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, listening to Steve Biko in South Africa saying, let's reference those who have come before us for the way that we should protest peacefully, because it's fine to see the pictures of protests in the streets on Friday and Saturday, but daggone it, I'm glad I caught myself. Daggone it, on Monday morning, I want to see folks in the boardroom, okay, at corporations saying, these are our demands. I want to see people in government saying, let's change policy. Let's adjust policy. I want to see policy decisions influence, not just in the streets, but on Monday morning. Finally, Monica, let me say this. I was on the national board of the NAACP when I was in college, and I was an influencer. But what I discovered is that we were taking people, busloads, 200,000, to Washington to protest. But we discovered it was on Saturday. No one was in Washington. The folks who own the hotels and the restaurants were like, oh, please come protest, because we have to make sure that we make a difference in how we do things. So let's not go to protest in Washington on Saturday when Congress is not in session and all the people are pressing us, making money, say, please come and fill up my hotels. Let's make our methods of protest.
But I have to say to you, not playing the devil's advocate for a minute, and I want all three of you, including you, Paige, to jump in, is that many of the students I talked to, there was a shirt that was on, I think, Twitter. And when the president had said, stand back and stand by or something to that effect, someone put up a shirt that said, be careful because I'm not that generation. That was my parents' generation. There is a generation gap here. How do you manage that?
Well, I would like to just say, I think President French just said it, and we have to keep reminding this generation, they are not engaging something process-wise that's new. There was a generation gap in my father's movement. You know, there was tension between SCLC that my father led and the SNCC.
Bernice, say one more time. Say my father. I just want to hear you say.
So there was tension between the younger SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Southern Christian Leadership Conference. My father had a gift sometimes of bridging, even though there still was some tension. And so they can learn a lot from the previous generation. And when I hear this stuff about me and our daddy's generation, I know they haven't studied. I heard P. Diddy the other day say something about there's a new Negro and we ain't scared. And I'm like, do you think my father was scared? John Lewis was scared? Do you think Amelia Boynton was scared? Do you think Rosa Parks was scared? Those people were very brave and they were courageous, but they were also disciplined. They also had strategy, the word that President French mentioned. And so I hear them. I feel the pain. We are impatient, and we should rightfully be, because we've been too patient and waiting around too long, and people are not going to wait anymore. And so it's a message to everybody all the way around that we cannot just continue to allow things to persist the way that they are. And I'll just leave with these other words. He's my daddy. I love to talk about my daddy. His words are powerful. He was a prophet. And until his words come true, we have to continue to pronounce them in the atmosphere. He said that until this nation prioritizes justice, that social tension will grow and turbulence in the streets will persist. That's what's happening with this generation, because no justice, no peace is not a chant. It's something that Dr. King reminded us. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. And this new generation is saying no justice, no peace. And as long as you do not have a prioritized peace in this nation, this social tension is going to grow. This turbulence in the street is going to persist. And you know, we got to do something about it. But I'm encouraging them, please really study that movement. And I encourage them to engage the King Center, because we can help you connect the dots.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I'm getting feedback. I think it's incredibly important that we make sure that, to President French's comment, that intentionality. And as Dr. King was saying, you know, at this point, people are emotionally bound to their side of the argument. We're not going to be changing anyone's idea. But violence really operates like an infectious disease, and it can become an epidemic. And so if people start going in that direction, people are going to mimic what other people do around them. So I think it's really important that regardless of the sides people are on, that you're intentional with your implication about what you want to see next. And we don't know if that's going to be in the courts. We don't know what election night's going to look like, the day after, you know, how close things are going to be. But it's important to find these unifying aspects that allow us to work as much as we can as one, but don't go off in a direction that you're not going to be able to dig yourself out of. It is going to be potentially a long fight. And there's a lot to be said for faith leaders being part of this. And, you know, we're at the Carter Center, we've been working with faith leaders. We're looking at communities where there could be violence, and we're trying to calm that. And we're doing that ahead of time, much as we would do in Mali or that we would do in other countries. We're trying to use some of those nonviolent means, as the King Center and the Carter Center have done, to have these conversations. Because if we're not intentional with how we move forward, we're not going to get anywhere. And that's a message to the younger generation as well. I've got a 24 and 21-year-old, and they're impatient, and they should be impatient because it's time for some change. But, you know, we need to do it in a way that we're not showing up in Washington on a Saturday and a Sunday. We're doing it in a way that there's engagement at the right levels at the right time.
You're on mute, Monica.
I didn't. Someone muted me.
You're good.
Okay.
Okay. How do we convince these young people to vote? I am still running into, for as many as we have had line up and register and vote, there's still a small group of them who are saying, I don't see what's in it for me.
Monica, if you would, that's been a concern, of course, as the president of Clark Atlanta University, and I have the privilege of serving now as the chair of the President's Council of Spelman, Morehouse School of Medicine, and Clark Atlanta University. That's 10,000 students, 10,000 of the brightest students. Yes, Bernice, I'm talking about your dad, as alum included.
And me. And you, as alum of Spelman.
Right. And I had my two of my children. George finished Morehouse last May. Unfortunately, he didn't have any debt. Did you all hear me? When Robert Smith made that great announcement, I'm like, I can't believe this. And then I told you, Bernice, finished Spelman this year. So I'm familiar, but we have 10,000 of some of the sharpest, most politically observant, conscious individuals in the nation that are not on campus. So I told the Biden campaign and Senator Harris that we have a challenge, because what we used to do would be to march all of those 10,000 students to the polls. We were there. If you walked into the classroom and didn't have on your "I voted," then you were ostracized. But they're home now. They're home. So challenge. We have to make sure that they still go to the polls, and as importantly, take their mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, so they have the opportunity to actually exponentially increase their vote by taking their whole family to the polls, because they're home. And that's the message I'm giving to all of my students. Still go to the polls and take your entire families, because you're not at the AUC center now getting that pressure and encouragement to go to the polls.
Well, let me just again say, you are talking about people who, all of us, were blessed to be able to go to college. But what about that essential worker, that person who is making less than minimum wage, who really can't see the benefit of voting because they haven't been helped over the years? Integration has not meant integration to a fair wage, to good housing, and to not being able to send their child to school. We are blessed, but there are some people who have not benefited from what your father has done.
Well, Monica, I think a lesson that we ought to learn, that we should have already learned, is that voting again is one essential ingredient. We have not done a good job of connecting voting to our responsibility as citizens and how you access and utilize your power as a citizen in this nation. And we need to do a better job of that. People who are in those positions need to be connected to, and we need to figure out how to connect them to organizations and entities doing work on the policy side. They need to be connected to organizations or entities or individuals who are part of those folks who are going into the boardroom, so they participate beyond elections. It has always troubled me from age 18, because I've been a part. I was born into the movement, but when I started voting, and I was a part even before that of all these get out the vote campaigns. And as I continue to age, I'm not getting older. I'm just continuing to age. So as I continue to age, I would always ask the fundamental question, particularly in the Black community: why do we cheapen this whole process of being a citizen and narrow it down to just voting? Respect me more than that. Help me to understand the entire process. Help me to understand other ways that I can connect into the system of democracy. And we may have to go back. We've got to put some pressure on our educational systems, because we got to do a better job while they're children in elementary school, middle school, high school, of understanding that. So by the time they become of age to vote, they already understand the democratic process and what's involved from A to Z beyond just voting. So
Right.
we may not be able to correct it today with those that, still don't want to vote. But what we can do is put some things in motion going forward, so that next time we're just not getting out to vote. We're celebrating because so many people are voting because they have been massively educated and been engaged and connected into this whole process.
And how were they massively? You're right, Bernice. And they were massively engaged and educated. Let's go back to I could go back to biblical reference. Let's talk about the 10. You had 10, and then you had 1, right? That was, where are the other 10 that weren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to W.E.B. Du Bois. My faculty member at Clark Atlanta University, who put forth the whole talented 10th theory that says that just because you're part of the talented 10th does not mean that you don't have an obligation to go back and get the other 90%. We have to fill the other 90% while it's incumbent upon them to go to the polls, to register, to be social activists. And I'm going to come back now because I think Paige, I think there's something to contribute to this. I see you biting at the
Paige. I only wanted to jump in because you're so right, and what Dr. King was saying was right too. This generation has gotten towards click activism, so it's very easy for them to go on the computer and click and feel like they're active. But exactly how much buy-in is there? And so I think, as the Carter Center works on citizen observation and making sure that it's not just from election to election, but in foreign countries, that you're really getting people to buy into understanding what their rights are and where they can make a difference. And I think in the US and in Georgia, I was really happy with Georgia's Support the Vote. We were able to see that so many companies, talking about essential workers, talking as Monica did, about those who didn't get a college education and who really are going to work every day, and do they have to take off to vote? How important is that? Lots of companies today, if November 3rd off as a day to vote. I mean, this has got to be ingrained in the fabric, the social fabric, and the economic fabric of the U.S., the importance of your vote and the importance of being engaged. And it can't just be through the computer, but we'll take it where we can get it. So at least there is a computer, so as people are stuck at home, they can be involved. But it's up to organizations like all of ours to really find ways to properly influence people getting involved in these important issues.
And thank you, Carter Center. I should say the Carter Center is awesome. I was president before I came to CAU, Miles College, for almost 15 years. And my fiance, Dr. Welch, she brought all of her students to the Carter Center on an annual basis, and you all treated them so well. And that made a huge difference in them being involved, and President Carter's whole aura of inclusivity. So thank you so much for the Carter Center.
So I'll quickly say to all three of you, your final thoughts. We only have about 3 minutes left in the program, 5 minutes. So I'd like your final thoughts when it comes to the election this year and the citizens' responsibility after the election.
Well, I think our responsibility is to recognize that this is another election. We've had many before. We're going to have many after. And as we've all said, you're voting beyond the presidency. You're voting down the ballot. In most instances, those local elections and even those that are running for Congress and Senate are just as, if not more, important. But recognize, again, and I keep emphasizing, it is one of the essential ingredients, but it's not the only ingredient, being a part of democracy. We have, at this point, there has not been proven to be a greater system of government, which is democracy. Democracy, what makes us a democracy is of, for, and by the people. Without us participating as voters, we're giving over our power potentially to becoming aristocracy or dictatorships. I will vote just because I want to preserve my democracy. And I will continue in the nonviolent pathway because I believe in creating the beloved community. And I recognize that we have work to do all the way around, and we'll never like each other, like each other. We may not all think alike, but we can find win-win pathways in this country if we're willing to be intentional, engaged, and strategic, and if we're willing to be courageous.
Hear, hear. No election system is perfect, but Americans have been doing this successfully for over 250 years, and we're going to do it this time. And this isn't. Hopefully, it's the last pandemic we see, but it's not the last. It's not the last cross we'll have to bear on trying to get elections free, fair, and transparent. So, I say to people, please go out to vote. Recognize that there will be a loser, and that we will move on because we always move on. And the question is, where can you be engaged? Where can you be intentional as we move forward? Win or lose, it's going to be an important time for people to understand what their role is and that they have a voice.
Dr. French.
Thank you again, Monica, for the opportunity to be engaged with these distinguished panelists this evening. I mean, I'm truly honored. And my mind went back to when you asked me about how do we engage college students. I remember being a college student at the University of Louisville. I wanted to transfer to Morehouse. I came and I met with a gentleman at the Ebenezer Church. That gentleman took me and my mom and my sisters to lunch, and that was Daddy King. And Daddy King, he said to me, he said, listen, I saw a group of people standing, he said, that's a group of winos. He said, you always have to take position of leadership. He said, if you ever walk into a room, and Bernice, I'm right about this. He said, if you ever walk into a room and you ask who's in charge and no one says I'm in charge, then you say, I'm in charge. Daddy King influenced me from that day, that when I walk in the room and I try to ask who's in charge, if you say you're not in charge, guess what? I'm in charge. And I'm saying to my students and to the Atlanta community, if you're not stepping up to say, we're going to vote and we're going to take leadership, I'm telling you, I'm in charge and we're going to the polls on November the 3rd, period.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists, and a huge amount of thanks to the King Center and the Carter Center for this timely and important initiative. Now, we must keep working together to ensure positive and peaceful elections. If you have not voted yet, you have one last day tomorrow to early vote. And Tuesday, polls open at 7 a.m. They close at 7 p.m. Remember, if you are in line at 7, you will be allowed to vote. It's your right. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.